Sword and scimitar. I probably pronounced that wrong. Okay, sword and scimitar. Or scimitar. Away east over the thousand-tongued sea, with all its sweet promises, its stabs and sudden rushes, one silver-gold blade of light. A sword! No! A scimitar! That's what I saw when I lifted the salt-sticky flap of our tent. Lord Stephen and I reached Venice at noon yesterday with Turld, our armorer, and our stableman, Rise. St. John's Eve. Rise, I thought that was any other sense. Rise St. John's Eve. The day when Winnie kissed me right on the mouth, 2 years ago, long before we were betrothed. We weren't allowed into Venice herself. All the Crusaders are billeted out here on the island of St. Nicholas. But we've been invited to a sea feast in the city. And so have Milan de Provence and his squire, Bertie, who's only 13. Frenchmen wearing red crosses, Germans and Italians, Flemings with their green crosses. There are thousands and thousands of Crusaders on this island, but we haven't met any other Englishmen yet. All night I slept and stirred and slept to the sounds of water. They washed away our 7-week journey. The sun rose. I was newborn. Chapter 2. God's Army. It was only when I rode Bonami down the spine of this island today that I understood what an army really amounts to. And I'm a part of it. St. Nicholas is very long, but no more than half a mile wide. And Lord Stephen and I and Rise and Turld have a very small camp right at the northern end. About a quarter of a mile away, there are 50 men from Provence, led by Milon, I don't know. And beyond them, I came to the encampment of hundreds of Italians. As I rode in, a trumpeter, I thought trumpeter was the word anyways, a trumpeter played. His trumpet caught fire in the sunlight, and I stood up in my saddle and shouted. Then I saw a monk standing in the middle of a crowd of sitting men. Lay, he called out, La Francia? La Germania? English, I said. Ingles, the monk shouted. L'Angleterra. L'Angleterra. He put his staff between his legs and waddled around with a wagging tail, and everyone laughed. I've heard that the Sicilians and Greeks think all the English have tails, but I didn't know the Italians do as well. I dismounted, and the monk forefingered me. I say crusade is a new kind of warfare, he called out. A holy fight. Here are soldiers like monks. The Italian soldiers didn't look like monks at all. Greasy, half-shaven. They looked like bandits. They say no like San Nicolo, the monk told me. No much women, no much wine. I say, put on the armor of God. The whole armor of God, I replied, the belt of truth, the sword of the Spirit, the helmet of salvation. Bravo! Exclaimed the monk. He reached into the pocket of his gown and pulled out a little wooden box. Then he stepped towards me and opened it. Inside, there was a leathery brown stick of a thing with a black tip lying on a pad of scarlet silk. Finger, said the monk. Finger of San Runcimano. Kiss. He closed the box again and held it up. I closed my eyes and held my breath. I kissed the lid. Next, I rode into the encampment of some soldiers from Picardy. They were all yelling and jeering. When I came close, I could see two men having a sword fight. One was on his knees and gasping. His left arm was dangling beside him, and blood was dripping from his hand. Then I recognized Millen's squire, Bertie, standing just a few steps away. "Bertie!" I called out. "What are you doing here?" Bertie jerked his head, but his eyes never left the fighting men. "Look at them!" "Does Millen know?" "I don't care." "Why are they fighting?" "It's a test. He won't surrender." How can we beat the Saracens if we start shedding each other's blood? "You can't have a test without a winner and a loser," Bertie said. "He's lost 2 fingers so far. Look!" I didn't want to look, and I don't know why the man on his knees didn't surrender. I wheeled away fiercely, and Bonamy snorted. Bonamy snorted. Whatever. Okay. "Where are you going?" Bertie shouted. "Arthur!" All the way down the island there were encampments, conical tents and pyramids, marquees and flapping makeshifts that looked as if they'd blow away as soon as the sea wind opened its mouth. And milling around each encampment there were knights and squires and soldiers, and a few women and children. I saw pairs of squires wrestling and practicing at quarterstaff, and I saw little groups running races and trying out sword strokes against the Pell. And suddenly I heard in my head the voice of Alan, Lord Stephen's first armourer. "You won't last long on a crusade. You'll get mulched." But I've grown 3 inches since then, and I've practiced hard, even when I didn't want to, even when Lord Stephen was away. I'm much stronger than I was before. I saw some men praying, some sharpening their weapons, shaving each other with cutthroats, watering their horses, singing raucous songs. I saw a chain of men unloading dead chickens, and thousands of loaves from a Venetian galley, 2 whole mounds of them, side by side on the beach. I saw a Flemish falconer loose his bird, and watched the falcon climb and stoop on a seabird. Torald says gulls are stringy and taste fishy, and even more salty than our salted pork at the end of winter. I just left the German camp when the devil whispered in Bonamy's right ear. Bonamy snorted. He almost screeched. He reared up on his hind legs. Then he leaped forward, and it was all I could do to stay in the saddle. "Bonamy!" I yelled. "God's gristle! Stop!" It was no use. Bonamy charged straight through the Angevin encampment. He uprooted one of the chicken tent pegs and dragged the guy rope behind him. The whole thing collapsed. I could hear people yelling and dogs snarling and cooking pots clanging, but I couldn't stop Bonamy. He kicked off the rope and galloped back up the spine of the island past the Flemish and Norman encampments before I was able to pull him up. One of the Angevin cooks screamed oaths and shook his ladle at me. God help me! I'm not riding anywhere near that camp again. When we got back, Bonamy looked at me with his damson eyes as if absolutely nothing happened. He gave me a friendly neigh. I inspected his hooves and then his genitals. I looked into his mouth, his left ear, his right. It was puffy and almost closed. A wasp, maybe, or a hornet. Anyway, a devil's sting. I could tell something was worrying Lord Stephen. "What's wrong, sir?" I asked. "2 knights from the Ile-de-France have just arrived. They've told Millen that 5 of the knights have broken their oaths." Hover, then swoop. Okay, I will pause it here.